universe, about happiness, about suffering, etc., etc. So Buddhism's got its own very specific approach to this, but it's not as if this is all brand new to the Buddha. He didn't chuck out what he'd learned before. He'd verified and experienced the truth of much of what he'd already experienced from his own background with the previous traditions, with the Hindu traditions, but then he diverged in his own direction. And indeed, as Buddhism is cultivated over the centuries in many countries, and in the literature, there are many variations of these interpretations of all these teachings, because that's the way human beings are, you know. So the teachings you're hearing from my mouth are coming from the tradition of my lamas, Lama Zopa, Lama Yeshe, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the Gelug tradition, and although I've got teachers in other Tibetan traditions, and they all, as we all know, they come from the great Nalanda tradition in India, which in turn was about the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 10th, 9th, 10th century, and that came from the Buddha, which came from the great Indians before him. And karma was already this very elaborate presentation of the way the universe works. So of course we think of it as religion, and then if we're materialists, philosophical materialists, we don't respect religion because we don't think it's real. We think it's some information coming from on high that you're supposed to believe. So I think it's a really crucial point to always remember, even if we're Buddhists, you know, to really remember the point that Buddha is not a creator. That means, you know, what we normally think of as religion, it comes from on high. It's something coming from a creator, from God, a superior being, who necessarily has created the universe, who creates the laws, and who is kind of the boss, you know. And that's the view we have of religion. So therefore we consider God as a person we must obey and don't disobey, and we believe in what God says. I mean, I think from the Christian point of view, it will be the worst sin of pride to actually consider that you have to prove that God is right. That would be totally appalling, you know. But the point is, with the Buddha, he's not that. So in a sense, he's radically different, although it appears on the surface. I mean, look, I look like I'm a nun. I sang a prayer. This looks like religion, you know, but it's a radically different approach. And it's really important, even if we have been Buddhists for years, to remember this, because it implies, understanding this implies the approach, implies how we treat Buddhism, how we use it in our lives, you know. So like I said, one of the commonest things we think of when we call religion, we talk about believing in something. It's a very powerful word. And so immediately, if we're philosophical materialists, and most of us are, we're brought up in this culture, you know, as soon as you can't see something with a microscope, or if you like, then we think it can't be true. You can't prove its truth. Well, the crucial point here, if we try to consider that Buddha is actually more like Einstein than he is like other religions, because he, from his own experience, like Einstein, has observed the universe, has come up with certain findings about the way it exists, and has presented his findings. That really is the Buddha. I mean, it's a surprise to us, because as soon as we hear about karma, reincarnation, just as soon as because we have a very fixed view of what the mind is in the materialist world, that it's the function of the brain, and we know perfectly well the brain doesn't reincarnate anywhere, it just goes into a bit of dust when you die. So we assume something mystical. But the Buddha's view is quite different. So even before we begin to understand Buddha's teachings, it's really important to remember he's not a creator. He did not make, let's hope he didn't make this stuff up. I mean, this is what you've got to verify him for. You know, if you just go to some class and they say they're a scientist and you believe what he tells you, and then he's an idiot who's made it up, well, you're a fool. You've got to check and verify to see if Buddha's a valid person historically. And if he is, then whether it is the crucial... Oh, Anthony's iPad. There you go, he's off. The crucial thing to remember is, I mean, it's a good question. Where did this information come from? And this is very fascinating. I quote this, but it's the only time I've ever been asked this question. It's very fascinating to me. And in fact, it was a scientist in New Zealand many years ago. It was really fascinating. The only person who's ever articulated this question. He said, Anthony, turn your, that's it, yeah. He said, who revealed the teachings to the Buddha? Which is a brilliant question if you take the view, you know, that religion is by definition revelation from on high by God or somebody. And that is the view of religion. And I'm not criticizing, but that, you know, that is not the Buddha's view. It's very simple. So I said to him, and he was a bit shocked by my answer, I said, would you ask Einstein who revealed the teachings about relativity to him? And everybody laughed. Of course we wouldn't, because we know immediately that Einstein is this human being who uses intelligence. And this is the crucial point about natural law. It's a major point. When we're religious, we talk about God's law. It's a very powerful concept. But the Buddha doesn't assert such a concept. There's nothing like that in Buddhism. But that's how we think in religion. So then when we think of natural law, and that's what we know that science is dealing with, what can be seen and proved, well, that is exactly the way Buddha talks. So then to understand that, then you mean you can prove reincarnation? You mean you can prove karma? Well, of course you can. That's the point. If not, then, Buddha shouldn't talk about it, because he's not a creator. It has not come from revelation. He didn't have a dream about this. He didn't have a vision. Well, he didn't make it up in just the same way that Einstein didn't. And Einstein, too, also, when he presents you what he's found to be true from his own intelligence, he says, this is what I have found to be true. Don't believe me. Go check it out yourself. And that's exactly the approach in Buddhism. So it's identical. I mean, we might be shocked hearing it put that way very bluntly, but this is the point. And as the Dalai Lama points out to us modern people, if when you've decided to take Buddhism, this is my word for it, to take Buddhism as your hypothesis, to take Buddhism as the view that you're working with, if as you progress practicing Buddha's methodology, you obviously you're checking it and you're proving the points as you go, that's the point. Then if you can actually discover from your own direct experience at a certain stage in your practice that what Buddha says is actually wrong, well, of course you must reject him. In just the same way that Einstein, if you follow Einstein's methodology and you discover at some point he's actually wrong, well, he'd be the first person to thank you, So that's the approach in Buddhism, which I think is a surprise to us, because we think of it as a belief. We think it's religion. So we go around shopping, I'll believe in this, but I won't believe in that, and I'll believe in this, and we put them together in our little bag. Not like that. That's intellectual laziness. So what is this business about karma? Well, it's first of all, Buddha only talks about what he's observed, natural law. So before we go on anything, you've got to know what he means by the mind. Because if Buddha has observed karma, if he has observed reincarnation, it's obvious that it must be with another level of consciousness that we don't posit in our ordinary world, because we can see very clearly that's not what we discover from neuroplasticity. That's not what we discover from neuroscience. There's a level of consciousness that can see the past and future. That sounds utter nonsense. But this is exactly the point that Buddha's making. We have levels of consciousness, levels of cognition that are necessarily subtler than the grosser level of sensory and conceptual. And this is these Indians before the Buddha, they discovered this. They're the ones who actually created this amazing technique that's called, in general, single-pointed concentration. The world vaguely knows it as mindfulness, but it's this incredibly sophisticated skill of the consciousness, the mind, that enables you to go to these subtler levels, to completely subdue the grosser level of cognition. So clearly that does not exist in our modern world. So we have to posit that as a possibility right here. It's all in the literature. It's up to us to find out, but it's all there. And this is well before the Buddha. And this, on the basis of this technique, you can then, what these amazing Indians did, they actually mapped the mind, not with a microscope and not the brain, the actual cognitive process. And this is what's a very shocking concept, actually. We don't have anything that's equivalent in the modern psychology, modern psychiatry, modern neuroscience, So this is where we're coming from here. So anybody like the Buddha, since the Buddha, who's also done the job, they will have observed that the consciousness is not physical. This is a fundamental thing to at least hypothesize for this discussion. And in general, to understand Buddhism at all, you have to understand what he means by the mind. Not just to believe it, but to hypothesize it, The consciousness, when he says the word mind or consciousness, he isn't referring to the brain. He's not saying there's no brain, but that's not his expertise, okay? That's not his expertise. And for him, brain and mind are not synonymous. It's very clear. As far as he's concerned, the mind and consciousness, these words are synonymous. These are referring to the actual cognitive subjective process itself. Indeed, at the grosser level, brain absolutely plays a central role. And the simple way I would put it is, that the brain is like the physical indicator of what's going on in the mind. It's a way of saying it. So the mind is not physical. Absolutely fundamental. If we can prove that Buddha is wrong on this, then the whole of Buddhism collapses into a heap of utter absurdity. And that's a fact, So that's the first point. Not physical. Second point about your mind is, as I've suggested, it's got these far more subtle levels of cognition that don't depend upon the physical, that don't depend upon the brain. And this is a pretty radical idea, which is why we think it's religion, It's not a question. So then the third thing about the mind, and this is a bit of a shock to us, is that this is not quite the shock yet, the shock's coming, But this next point about the mind, it's the word that Buddha uses to refer to the entire cognitive process itself. Thoughts, intellect, feelings, emotions, unconscious, subconscious, to the subtlest level of our being. You know, this is what's known as mind, consciousness. So the next point, which is the shocking one, and whether we're a Christian, a Muslim, or a materialist, this is a shock. That what goes on, what your mind, the contents of your mind, your anger, your love, your kindness, your compassion, whatever you want to call it, your feelings, your emotions, that we utterly, if we're Christian, well, you know, we assume that the essence of who we are comes from God, isn't it? At the time of conception, or if you're Jewish, I think later, I heard, God puts the soul in later, after conception, a few months later, I'm not quite sure. But either case, the essence of you, if you're a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew, the essence of you is coming from God. You're created by God. The point, the materialist view, is basically you're created by your mummy and daddy. Pretty straightforward, isn't it? And we posit that the brain is what there is, and that comes from mum and dad. And Buddha doesn't disagree. The brain definitely does come from mum and dad. But the Buddha would say it ain't your mind, baby. So Buddha would assert we've got the body, but we don't have it. He doesn't assert a soul. He doesn't discuss it. He doesn't use that word at all. But he uses the word mind. But the word mind refers to these subtle levels of our being, including the grosser level and the subtler of our cognition. And the point is, if the mind doesn't come from your mummy and daddy, and if your body does, no problem. If there's no essence coming from a superior being, then where does my love and kindness, and where do my habits, and where do I come from? Well, from previous moments of yourself, speaking very simply, you know. If you can track back your consciousness as like a river of mental moments starting now, and you know that if you had perfect memory, you could track back all of the thoughts and feelings of today to yesterday. I mean, inexorably. There wouldn't be sort of a spot where for 10 minutes you didn't exist and then you started again. No, not like that. It's continuous. So your thoughts can be tracked back and back. Of course, we don't remember 99% of our thoughts, but we can deduce this logically. So you track your thoughts and feelings back to yesterday, this river of mental moments, and you keep going that moment of today, that moment of mine came from the previous moment, and that previous moment has to have come from a previous moment, logically, and you keep going back very rigorously, and you know that you'll end up back at the time you popped out of your mummy's womb. And you came out shouting, so we can deduce there was a mind there. So the consciousness there at the time of birth, where did it come from? Well, the previous moments of that mind while it was in the fetus, in the mother's body. And you track it back the few months, and you keep tracking back and back, and you will inexorably get back to the first second of conception. So then we know very well, the second before conception, the egg was in mummy's body, the sperm was in daddy's body, but where was your mind? Well, it tracked itself back to a previous moment of that very continuity of mental moments, which, of course, the Buddha is saying is not physical. And this is fundamental in Buddhism. The whole of Buddhism is the laws of karma, Buddhist psychology, Buddhist metaphysics, Buddha's view about Buddhahood, Buddha's view about virtue, morality, all are based upon this finding that consciousness is not physical. It's its own entity. It does not come from mummy, daddy, and it is nothing that comes from a creator. This is a fundamental point in Buddhism. So, of course, we can't prove it immediately. Just like you can't prove E equals MC squared immediately. You take the hypothesis and you go towards it. Pretty reasonable. So this consciousness of ours, as far as the Buddha is concerned, goes back and back and back. So the instinct we have is, well, that's great, but where did it begin? We want a first moment. Well, the Buddha says that's a really dumb question. What do you want a first moment for? It sounds like hilarious. But basically, you know, and this is, we'll just mention on this briefly here, and then we'll go into how this law of karma works, and crucially to try and recognize the experiential implications of it. You know, this is the point. So this consciousness going back and back and back, we want a first moment. So of course, if we're Christian or Muslim or whatever, we'll go back to God, and God is the creator. Well, if you're a naughty child at school, you'd say, please miss, where did God come from? You know, and that's not an appropriate question. We realize that, but for the Buddhist one, it's a very valid question. So the Buddha has these many philosophical discussions about the nature of a creator, the nature of Buddha, blah, blah, blah. So the fact is, as far as Buddha is concerned, the mind is product of the law of cause and effect. So by definition, cause and effect implies at any given moment, something you posit as existing, we know it didn't come from nowhere. It just has to have causes, which means there's a previous moment of it. And so the mind is the same. So even intellectually, it's a really good exercise. To think, if this moment of mind, where did it come from? A previous moment. You get back to the first second of conception. Where did that moment of mind come from? A previous moment of that mind. And so you keep going. So we think if you can look far enough back, you're going to find a first moment. Buddha says, no, sorry, you won't. Which completely sounds hilarious to us, totally counterintuitive. The Buddha basically says consciousness is beginningless. Well, he also says that matter is beginningless too, the very nature, the physical universe itself. I remember His Holiness in all these amazing discussions with scientists, kind of paraphrasing. He said, Big Bang, no problem. Just not the first Big Bang, that's all. Because in other words, and they talk especially in the Vajrayana about this, the physical matter is made of the 4 elements. And so universes do have a certain moment when they begin, and cups have a moment when they begin. People begin. Everything has a beginning, but it comes from previous stuff. You can't have a thing that doesn't come from previous stuff, in a sense. This is the essential concept of cause and effect, like the chicken and the egg, really. So anyway, that's the first point. So then what is it that runs this consciousness? Okay, that's that. Now, one way of presenting all of Buddhism is in terms of its being a method for how to get happy and how to stop suffering. That's really the heart of it, actually. And that sounds appealing. No one wants suffering, everyone wants happiness. Another way of presenting Buddhism is indeed as a method of ethics, and it comes down to the same thing. Another way of presenting is it's a method of stopping ignorance and getting wisdom. Well, that sounds a bit abstract. I mean, we're not so sure if we want wisdom, but we all want happiness. Thank you very much. So they all come to the same thing, though, the different doorways into Buddhism. So now given the view of karma, let's now take this one of happiness and suffering. So the Buddhist analysis, the Buddhist observation is that this law of cause and effect, it's a law, it's a natural law, which means he didn't make it up. He's not a creator. He's not making it up. And I want to stress this point again. Natural law means that it is just that way. It is that way. Botany, in other words, as long as it's been our planet, with all the ways the weather is and everything, as long as it's our planet, we know botany has always been there. Whether there's knowledge about botany, that's a different discussion. So, relativity, we think that Einstein created relativity. Relativity has always been there. He articulated it, he observed it and codified it and articulated it. That's the meaning of natural law. This is quite powerful. So he's not like a creator who created, relativity and then copyrighted it. No, relativity has always been the way things are. If it's true, it's always been the way things are. If you think about, before anybody had numbers, there was always 2 things on the table. Whether you had that concept is another discussion. That's the intellectual knowledge about it. So that's what natural law means. Natural law means that's how things are. And that's exactly the Buddha's approach. He's saying he's observed the way things are. This is a very major point to get, And that's why our view of religion is that God is the source of the entire universe. And that's God. And that's why there's God's law. It's a very powerful difference, actually. It's massive. So from this perspective, Buddhism is identical to the scientific approach. And I'm not being sarcastic here. As an approach, it's identical. But of course, it's not evident to us because we assume it's in the box called religion, not the box called intelligence, But this is the point in Buddhism. So, okay, as far as Buddha is concerned, the natural law that he has identified that literally runs the universe, or if you like, the law within which the universe runs, either way you put it. The law of botany is the natural law that runs gardens, or if you like, gardens run within the law of botany. Whether you know botany or not has got nothing to do with it. Flowers don't, the roses won't not grow just because you don't understand botany. They're going to grow no matter what. So the knowledge about botany is what we then have to learn, of course. And this is the approach. I want to turn my emails off. Hang on a second. How do I get my screen to go smaller? Exit full screen. Okay. Excuse me, people. I'll just ring off all my bells and whistles here. Okay. Now how do I get the big one back again? How do I get the big one back again? Oh, here we go. I'm here. Okay, good. Okay, so all right. So what Buddha is saying is that this natural law, he calls it the law of karma. Karma is a Sanskrit, it means action. So it's kind of used in a shorthand way. Oh, it's karma, we'll say, It's the law of karma, the law of action, the law of cause and effect, to be precise. So it's the law of cause and effect, not of cups and tables and computers. That's, computers is Mr. Steve Jobs' job, and that's his expertise, and cups and whatever. But there's the law that runs minds. Because the term in Buddhism is very interesting. The word that we translate in English as sentient being, it's kind of cute, but the Tibetan word is very delicious. It's sem chen, mind possessor. It's very clear, mind possessor. That's a very direct, delicious type. I love that word, best of all, mind possessors. So by definition, a sentient being, and there are trillions as far as Buddha is concerned, not just a few 7 billion humans. He's including all the creatures, all the bugs, all the dust mites, all the mosquitoes, all the animals. And then he is also asserting another whole level of reality where there are many other sentient beings that we can't see with our eyes or experience with our senses that also exist. So it's countless numbers, countless sentient beings, mind possessors, mind, remember, being not physical, that all that are, and this law runs, all these minds live within this law. So what he's saying is essentially this: everything, every millisecond, what we think and do and say, every millisecond, what we think and feel and then do and say is this process of sowing seeds. They use the analogy of botany. It's a really good one. Every millisecond, you're dropping seeds into your consciousness. You're programming your consciousness. Every millisecond, without exception, whatever you think, whatever you do, whatever you say, just naturally is programming your mind all the time, sowing seeds in your mind all the time. And these seeds won't go astray. They all get stored in the mind unless you consciously pull them out, like you do in gardens. So basically that's the first. And then these seeds will necessarily ripen as experiences in those minds further down the track. So the analogy of seeds and fruits is what they use. So Dalai Lama actually calls this, like he said, you can call it self-creation, which is a really interesting concept, you know. So the whole idea here is that everything we think and do and say, right this second, from every minute, every second, we're sowing seeds. And those seeds will ripen as fruits. So then, okay, how do we qualify those fruits? How do we qualify those seeds? How do we narrow them down? So this is where the whole business of happiness and suffering comes in. It's very straightforward. So every millisecond, we can see in our lives, can't we? If we start from the time we can remember up to now, you will be able to categorize all the experiences of your life and all the experiences of your mind as either happiness or suffering. There's a third category, Buddha says, it's kind of neutral. Well, let's forget those, they're boring. But essentially, we know we only want the happy ones, and we absolutely know we do not want the suffering ones. So if you think about it, this is very simple for us. We want happiness and we don't want suffering. And you check the monkeys and the ants and the dogs, and you can deduce by their behavior, they're exactly the same as us. So the Buddha says, he almost takes this as a fundamental starting point. Every being in the universe wants happy. Every being in the universe doesn't want suffering, you know. So he frames karma in this framework. So the next level of detail about this law of karma, this natural law, it just happens naturally, is that all the thoughts and actions of body and speech that can be labeled negative, and it's a vast analysis we have to get into, but we can be very general, that's labeled negative or non-virtuous, those seeds necessarily will ripen further down the track in that river of mental moments as experiences of suffering. And every millisecond of what we can label virtuous or positive or useful or beneficial or productive, every thought and an action of body and speech necessarily programs the mind, sows seeds in the mind that necessarily will ripen down the track as what we call happiness. I mean, it almost seems too simple. It's kind of so simple. And this is his worldview. He's saying you can divide the experiences of all beings on this spectrum from happiness to suffering. It's a very simple way, even if you've heard about the lower realms and the upper realms and Buddha's view about reincarnation, we can describe them all in terms of the spectrum between intense suffering to intense bliss and happiness. And what runs this, so what is the cause of happiness and the cause of suffering? Essentially, the heart cause, the main cause, the essential cause, the main cause is here in the mind, done by that person. So Dalai Lama calls it self-creation. So this, in general, this is a simple concept. This is not intellectually too difficult to get. If we're talking about emptiness here, we'd be squeezing our brains, you know? But this is a really simple intellectual concept. But emotionally, it's so bizarre. It's so shocking only because it's so completely different from the analysis we use if we're a Christian, the analysis we use if we're, I mean, to some degree, there's a similarity, but they're absolutely fundamentally different from the analysis we use if we're materialists, which is the philosophy that prevails on the planet, isn't it? So if we can also, therefore we can also say that whatever we're experiencing now, this second, every single being on the planet right now, we can check our mind right now, check our experiences, and we can probably do some kind of level, you know, of happiness and suffering. So each moment that we label happiness, even mild happiness, each moment we label suffering, even mild suffering, all to the most intense, unless each one of them is a fruit of seeds planted in this mind back further down the track this way. So this as a concept is not difficult, but it takes a while for us to process this because we're not used to thinking this way. It's so insane, you know. So in other words, our mind coming from before. We come into this life, Buddha says. And we're going to be talking more of the weekend. We're going to certainly go into this, the process of death. It's really important to understand it. Because at the time of death, very specific things technically happen that determine the karmic seeds that we've planted in the past, determines which karmic seeds are triggered, which then will program us for our next life. So, in other words, right now, that if we look into our life right now, we are the product. We are the product. In general, we know it's true. We're the product of past causes. So our materialist view would say we are totally the product of mummy, daddy, the genes, DNA, the chemicals, and the external events. And that's it. And then we track ourselves back to mummy and daddy and the grandmother and grandfather and great-grandma back to the monkeys. We know that's the way we think in our culture. If we're Christian, we cannot disagree with the physical rules, but we know we track the essence of ourselves back to God. In each case, we began in our mother's womb, isn't it? I began in my mother's womb, but not for the Buddha. Of course, I began in my mother's womb, but the source of me, the body came from mummy, daddy, grandma, grandpa, no problem. But the source of my thoughts and feelings and emotions, my tendencies, my experiences, my happiness, my suffering, they are sourced in the mind itself from the previous actions of this person. That's the concept. So this is why His Holiness says self-creation. And to unpack this, and then to try to, if we take it as a hypothesis, if we choose to, as Buddhists, then this is what we're using as the basis, obviously, of what seeds we want to plant and what seeds we don't want to plant. I mean, if you look in a garden, that's why it's a good analogy, because your life is your garden. You look in your garden and you're learning botany, suddenly you have the method to understand what's there. And then more crucial, you have the method to help you know what you want to put there in the future. And you start now, you know your garden is the fruit of the past, and what you put now will determine the fruit of the future. So by knowing the fruit that you want, that determines the seeds you plant. This is exactly the approach to karma. So really the approach here is a very personal, very direct, a sense of responsibility, you know. So why it's difficult for us, let's look at why it is difficult for us. Why is this view difficult for us? Like I said, intellectually, it's not that complicated. We're all intelligent. We can hear it easily. We could write it down and repeat it, you know. But it's difficult because it's not the view we have now. We have a very different view in our bones. And I think this is one of the major points that Buddha's making, actually. If we're materialists, I think it's very common, it's very fascinating this. If we're materialists, and I don't mean that in a sarcastic way, I mean in a literal way, if you're a philosophical materialist, which is what people who don't assert a religion are, for example. If you're a philosophical materialist, we tend to say, oh, I don't believe in anything. Then we think people who are religious, they've made something up and they're believing in it. But I'm an intelligent person and I just see reality. That I think is how materialists think. And I think it's a little bit arrogant. It's kind of arrogant, as if somehow, but the Buddha, all the Buddha's saying, this is the point I'm getting at here, if we look into our thoughts and feelings and emotions, we actually, all of us are riddled with layers and layers and layers and layers of belief systems. So some people believe their mother made them. Some people believe their mind is the brain. This is not insulting neuroscientists. This is not insulting those views. It's not saying there's not truth there. But most of us, we haven't studied it. Who's studied neuroscience? You know, and this is a big point. We often say, oh, well, it's been proven, we'll say. Well, have you proved it? I'm not saying neuroscience is wrong, but we've proved that 1 + 1 is 2. That's true. So we can say it's our own direct experience. But until it's our own direct experience, it's only belief until it's our direct experience. We can easily see enough people have proven lots of things, and we're happy that they proved it. But until we have proved it, it's not experiential. And that's pretty clear. Millions of people are great at doing gardens, and you can bring a gardener in every day. But if you don't know botany, you will never know what to do to get a garden. So the point I'm getting at here is we've all got lots of belief systems in our mind, you know. We've all got them. Otherwise, you wouldn't even breathe one single word out of your mouth. You'd just be sitting there like an idiot. Because everything what we do with our body and speech comes from our mind. So what we're trying to talk here is, and Buddha's saying that why we suffer, Buddha's this interesting point, his essential point he's making, is that the degree to which the thoughts and beliefs and philosophical viewpoints that we all have in our mind is the extent to which, to the degree that they're in sync with reality, is the degree to which we're happy and wise. And the degree to which the views we have in our mind are not in sync with reality, to that degree we suffer. So his main point, and this is really weird initially, the main reason we all suffer, he says, is because of what's in our mind. And the main reason we are all happy is because of what's in our mind. This is the biggest shock. This is the essence of the Buddha's approach. This is the essence of the Buddha's approach, you know. So what you try to do as a Buddhist, if you've chosen to be a Buddhist, let's say, you're beginning to buy into the Buddha's views. Well, you're listening to them, you're learning them like you do Einstein, so you can become familiar with these ideas. And as you progress first theoretically and then experientially, you start to prove them to yourself. That's the whole point. That's what practice means. So here we're just discussing intellectually the theories, you know. So the Buddha's view is then, all my happiness, all my suffering, the main causes are not the outside, are not mummy or daddy or my genes or my chemicals or COVID-19 or husband leaving me or someone beating me up. They are not the main cause. It doesn't mean they're not a cause. Of course they're a cause. They're a major cause, but they're not the crucial central one. And that's the extra point that Buddha's making. He says we're not factoring in the essential cause of all experiences, which is the mind. That's his point. And that takes a while to hear. So let's just unpack it a bit more. But how are we going for time? I haven't got my clock on. 6:43. What time do we have to finish? Okay, we've got time. We've got lots of time. Well, we're running out of time. It's very quick. Things go very quickly, don't they? So, okay. So far, so good. Before we even begin to go in detail, I'm assuming some of you will be here tomorrow because we're going to unpack and unfold the whole thing all tomorrow, you know. So I've got a feeling we should have. So I've just presented a few points. We're going to start to unpack it. So any questions to clarify the meaning of words, definitions, any general points here? Because we're going to unpack this in more detail, starting very soon. But ask me some questions now. I'd like to have that. Just put your hand up. Someone, anyone who would like to ask questions. And if not, I'll keep talking. There must be some questions. No? Yes,
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for your teaching. I'm just wondering, is there a tiny bit of physicality to the consciousness that we just can't measure?
Oh, Rebecca, that's an interesting question. Where are you talking from?
I'm talking from Australia.
Oh, where about?
Harvey Bay, Queensland.
In Queensland. Okay, good. On Harvey Bay. Oh, good, darling. Happy to see you. I've been there.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, honey, no, the Buddhist point is the very use of the word mind. What mind is say, in terms of being of Rebecca, the actual, in other words, the difference between dead Rebecca and live Rebecca is the presence of Rebecca's consciousness. That's what gives life to you. That goes, you know, that causes the physical parts of you to function, to the body to be warm, all the bits and pieces to work. The body does its job. It's a very sophisticated thing, but there's not 1/millionth of a millimeter of any part of Rebecca's body, her physical energy, that is mind. By definition, consciousness is cognition, is not physical. but they're intimately, inextricably related. I mean, especially in the Vajrayana teachings in Buddhism, in the more esoteric teachings, there are these detailed, and this is the basis of the Tibetan medical system. Your body and or the Chinese are saying, your body and your mind are intimately, inextricably linked. So it's not as if they're completely separate doing their own trip. They're utterly interdependent, there's no question, you know, but they're still fundamental. In other words, you can't separate them. Well, you can't, no, okay. Okay, body and mind. In other words, if you've got eye consciousness, consciousness in Buddhism is the ability of your eye, of your mind, that the bit of your mind that functions through the medium of the eyeball and all the bits and pieces working nicely. So without an eyeball, you cannot have eye consciousness, but eye consciousness isn't the eyeball. They're interdependently linked. That's the way to put it. Do you understand my point? They're intimately linked. And we can see that everything we do with our body affects our mind, and whatever we do with our mind absolutely affects our body. There's no question, but still they're distinctly different. But they're intimately connected. And this is even at a subtler level as well. When you go to your Tibetan doctor and she feels your pulses, she can feel very clearly these subtle wind energies, this prana coursing through your subtle nervous system. And each of those wind energies is intimately linked to your different states of mind. I mean, that's not how we talk with the brain science. And so she can see immediately that anxiety that anxiety you're having is linked to that part of your mind, which is linked to those wind energies, which have gone berserk, you know. So they're very connected, but they're still not the same. That's the crucial point. Do you understand? That's the Buddha's view. Thanks, Rebecca. Someone else. Yes, Heather. Hello, darling.
Is our belief in faith the same thing?
Well, it's a really good question. Let me just look at the Buddhist psychological model, okay? There's in the list, there's all these different states of mind, and they describe them all in great detail and define them very clearly. So for sure, there's a word, faith and belief. And I think they're probably used fairly interchangeably in Buddhist psychology. So I can't say about what you think about them, but I'm telling you the Buddhist approach. And it's very clear that in the process of learning anything, and we can see this in our world, if you're going to go study acupuncture, you first got to check the teacher and know that they're valid. And then you start listening to what your teacher tells you. And the very first time you hear those teachings, you haven't got a clue what she's talking about, have you? You wouldn't have a clue if she's right or wrong. So you've got to, on the basis of checking her reputation, you're then prepared to trust what she says. And then you write it down, but then slowly when you do your homework, you know that that's the process of verifying it, isn't it? So faith or trust, look at the word confident, actually, confide, with trust. You've got to start with that, but the crucial point in Buddhism is you just don't leave it there. You don't just keep having faith in botany. You've got to learn botany, and then you can prove it for yourself and use it. That's the major point. So faith is powerful, but it'll only get you so far. But it is still a valid point. But the Buddhist view is you don't have blind faith. You've got to use logic to have faith. Use your wisdom. You don't just go believe any old doctor. We know that. We use our intelligence and check up, and we have confidence, and then we listen to their advice. So indeed, with some doctors, we might never prove what they're saying because we're prepared to trust them. But if you want that knowledge yourself, faith has to come first, but it's based on intelligence. It's a very important point, actually. Whereas we tend to think of religion as only faith because you can't prove it. And that's what Buddha disagrees with. You see my point? That's a good point, Heather. Thank you. What else, people? Any more questions?
I have a question.
I'm going to find you. Hang on.
Find me.
I've got to find you first. Wait. Where are you? Oh, there you go. Allie, go talk to me, sweetheart.
What about luck?
What about luck? What's your question?
Where does luck come into play if it plays, if at all?
There's no such thing. It's just superstition. Luck is nonsense. Good luck and bad. It sounds a joke I'm saying it. I'll spell it out. But the Buddhist view is, okay, if you understand there's a law called botany, you understand that, and you accept there's a law called botany, don't you?
I do.
And you accept that the law of botany, even if you don't know it, runs gardens, doesn't it? So you know no matter what pops up in that garden, you know it's on the basis of the law of botany. It's not just, oh, good luck, flowers came today.
You'd never say
that. But you'd never say that, would you? It's the same with life. Buddha says, if the karma is a natural law, and we haven't even gone into it yet, we're going to go into it, runs the universe. So by definition, there cannot be such a thing as good luck and bad luck. It's a very shocking concept because we actually believe that if things are good luck and bad luck.
Right, like where you're born or who you're born.
No, none of that's luck and nothing to do with luck. It's all completely to do with the law of karma. We'll go into it in more detail. Are you going to be here tomorrow? You're thinking you'll be here tomorrow? Okay, good, darling. We'll unpack it all. Okay? Thank you very much, Ali. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Go, Fernando. Talk to me.
It's in relation to faith. The other day I was receiving a teaching in relation to the different types of faith that are described in the Lambrim. And then it was only the last one, the faith of conviction, that kind of resonated with me. But then again, when am I going to be able to be convinced of what is taught in Buddhism? It would be only after I have a realization or a siddhi, because, yeah, I mean, intellectually I could... Sorry?
After what you said, only after what did you say? I know.
Only after I have a realization or a siddhi, to get a siddhi, that I would be convinced about the path of Buddhism.
Of course, but no, it's not. No, it's not. You don't. You know, you say you got to practice mathematics. You don't realize it all at the same time. You realize things incrementally, don't you? It's one step at a time. You first realize that 1 + 1 is 2. Then you realize the next level of math, and it grows on until you eventually can realize E = mc². I mean, there are levels of realizations. The very first one we need to get. Okay, all the realizations that Buddha's talking about are already in their nature quite high. We have to realize impermanence, and we have to realize karma, and then we realize the nature of mind, and we realize emptiness. Of course, it's progressive. It's one step at a time. How else would you learn anything, Fernando? Why is that disappointing?
It is just that I don't have any realization, obviously. And
well, join the universe. Join the universe, honey. It's okay. It's take time. We've got to start somewhere. Where else can we start but somewhere? And have confidence as we go. And this is an interesting point, actually, Fernando. Don't underestimate intellectual certainty. This is a really good point. Thank you. It's a really good point. This is also a good point for Heather. Who asked me about faith? Heather, wasn't it? Yeah, that's right. Listen to this. This is important. In the text, you might have noticed, you know, they start with, we all start, in relation, let's say, to any body of knowledge. Let's say the simple piece of knowledge called the existence of a place called Melbourne in Australia. Let's just pretend, okay? Or let's say Hervey Bay, where Rebecca lives. Let's say you've never, there you are in Mexico, you've never heard of anything on the other side of the, on the other side of the planet. You've never heard of that part of the world. And so the first thing you hear is, there's a place called Hervey Bay. And you go, don't be ridiculous, you've never heard of such a place. So the very first starting point we all start with in any body of knowledge is they call wrong view. Ignorance, don't know anything. No, that's not possible. The first thing is you go, that's not possible. That's the first step we all have. Wrong view. Nah, not possible. Don't be ridiculous. Can't be such a place as Hervey Bay. Then you start to keep hearing other people say there's a place called Hervey Bay. And because you've got an open mind, you start to think about it. And you start to look into it. So then gradually your wrong view, your very concrete view, there's no Hervey Bay, begins to get a bit sort of broken down. And you start beginning to tend towards doubt, tending towards the wrong view. So you start to learn a bit about geography, and you start, because your mind's very closed right now, there's only Mexico City, let's face it, you understand, this is the analogy. And then you start to hear, well, maybe there's Hervey Bay. Then you go, no, not possible. But you keep looking into it. You start to learn more. And then you gradually move towards doubt, tending towards the fact that there is Hervey Bay. So you're beginning to get more confidence as you keep learning, not just because you feel about it, because you're learning about it, you're studying geography. So as you keep progressing, you get to a point where you have what they call belief. And this is a powerful realization already, correct belief based on the work you've done, the research, the people you've talked to, the maps you've looked at. You started to get really confident that there is such a place as Hervey Bay, based on knowledge and logic, not on wishful thinking. Are you hearing my point here, Fernando? The process of learning it, and you're getting really confident. And then eventually you really learn geography and you've got the best, and you can now say with certainty, and that's called inferential certainty. So based on the logic of maps and people and discussions and geography, and it's quick to do that. You can prove absolutely there is a place called Hervey Bay based upon all your research. Now that's merely still intellectual. You have not gone to Hervey Bay yet. You haven't had the direct experience of Hervey Bay. And the fact is you can't have the direct experience of Hervey Bay until you've had the intellectual knowledge. It's got to come first with the intellectual. So don't underestimate inferential certainty. Don't underestimate intellectual knowledge. And any body of knowledge would be this way. I mean, just use the same example as acupuncture. You could learn acupuncture theoretically to the point where you can even teach someone else theoretically. And you would not be wrong, but you haven't put one needle in anybody yet. But you've got very strong certainty intellectually. I think this is a really important point, and we don't think of religion like this. We think it is all just hit and miss and belief. But if something is this is my conclusion, if a body of knowledge, whether it's called Buddhism or acupuncture or botany or cake making, I don't care what it is a valid piece of knowledge, it has to be coherent first intellectually. So be content with that. One step, don't leave it there. Don't leave it in your head. It's got to turn into experience eventually. Are you seeing my point, Fernando?
Yes. Yeah, thank you. I'm trying to, but...
Good. Well, be relaxed. Enjoy it. Okay. Cool.
Venerable Robina.
Louise. Yes, sweetheart.
Hi.
Okay, so I'm following you of the mind and the body, interconnection between the mind and the body, and that there's this connection. So the body dies.
That's right.
So
the mind continues. That's the Buddha's view.
Yes.
And we're going to go into this in detail. You're going to be here tomorrow, Louise?
Oh, yeah.
Good, darling. We're going to go into it. That's your consciousness programmed by you every millisecond. Well, then, and then we're going to go into the death process because it's very interesting to learn about it. And the karmic seeds that will be triggered that will determine Louise's next life will be triggered at the time you died. Or to put it the other way, the seeds that would determine that Louise her consciousness when she left the previous body, not more than a few weeks before you found your way to your mummy's fallopian tube, the karmic seeds that determined Louise and her tendencies and her experiences, and we're going to go into this, they were triggered before you even left the past body 7 weeks before conception.
So what's ever the point of the body?
Well, this is a very good question. It's very fascinating. Okay, the only way I can do this is explain from the point of view of the more esoteric teachings in Buddhism, according to the Vajrayana, the more advanced teachings, the Tantrayana teachings, the Vajrayana teachings. And this is coming from the knowledge also in the yoga world, the Indians, and the Chinese a bit as well. So from that point of view, when they talk about mind, in other words, okay, if Louise finally did all the work and she became a Buddha and her mind is completely purified, there's no delusions, she's full of virtue, full of wisdom, full of clarity, then you could argue your consciousness is pure, unmanifest, all-knowing, all-pervasive, all-compassionate mind. And honey child, you do not need a bag of bones anymore. You are pure consciousness. And but you've got this subtle potential. So out of compassion, you will choose to be in a body for others because you're in charge of the process. But most of us are just locked into this system of creating negative karma that causes, by the way, in this model, they talk about, we've got gross consciousness, which is our conceptual, our senses, and then gross body, the one we can see. Then we've got subtle consciousness, which is much more subtle, and that's linked very subtly to this subtle physical energy. And then we even have very subtle consciousness. So the way they talk about, we don't need bodies. They're a big drag. They're the result of negative karma, actually. The result of, we've polluted our minds with negativity and with attachment, especially attachment, and we'll go into this, and all the other delusions. So that programs our mind, and then depending on the type of rebirth we're going to get, you end up with a lion's body or a human's body or an ant's body or even like a ghost's body. Ghosts also, these subtle beings, they've got like bodies of light, bodies of air. They're not happy people, but there's always a physical energy there. And what our mind does, how our mind does, that determines the kind of body we get or we go to when we get born. I mean, there's more to it than that. So we don't finally need a boring old body. In the end, they're drag. This walking sewer is a big drag, So when you purify your mind, you don't need it. But if you have compassion, and even though you've got to the point where you don't need more bodies, you'll happily, consciously choose to be born so you can help others.
Okay.
And make it useful. We'll go into it in more detail.
Yeah.
All right, Louise. Thanks, darling.
Thank you.
Any other questions, people?
Yeah. Hi, Venerable Robina.
Yes, darling.
I would like to ask you how to purify your karma. And second, if you could explain us, please, a little bit of collective karma.
Absolutely. So first I'm looking at the clock. What time did we start? Oh, yeah, we're fine then. Oh, we've got lots of time. Okay, good. Okay. So the purification one, are you going to be here tomorrow, Jimena?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's leave that to tomorrow. I want to talk about how we create karma first, and then we can talk about how we purify it, okay? But it's sort of the same principle, just creating another kind of karma, that's all. So collective karma, I mean, we'll go into that tomorrow, I think. So maybe, I can start now. We've still got 30 minutes. But before we go further, are there any more particular questions? So I'm going to answer all those eventually.
Venerable Robina, I don't know if this is something that you'll cover.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you'll let me know.
Who are you, Victor?
Victor, yes.
Victor, good. Talk to me.
Are these the rules that makes something positive or negative?
Yes.
Are these things that we know innately?
That's a good point.
Or do we have to like learn the rules?
I understand. It's a very good point. It's a really good point, Victor. Well, this is a really good point. You know, if I'm a Christian, and I was a Catholic, and I love my Catholic upbringing, I know very well, because God is the boss and God created the laws, God created the rules, and I needed to learn the rules. And as my Catholic priest friend, as I asked him, I always quote this, I said, well, in Catholicism, I suppose generally in Christianity, for example, what defines something as a bad action? In other words, what's the law? And he said, what defines an action as negative is that it's that God said not to do it. So that's a very powerful concept. He said there is some aspect of natural law. In other words, killing is wrong, mainly because God said don't to kill. So it's a sin in your mind if you do what God said not to do. This priest said there is natural law. People don't like getting killed. But the major component that determines that it's wrong is because God said not to do it. Now, that is got nothing to do with Buddhism. But Buddha says it's only natural law. So any action, in general, what the Buddha calls a negative action at the heaviest level is an action that we do that harms another. And if we analyze that action in general in the world, you know, why do you kill? Why do you steal? It ain't based on love. It ain't based on generosity. It's based on anger. It's based on whatever you want to call it. So without being moralistic about it, it's not a punitive system. We can observe anger in our mind. We can observe jealousy. We can observe when we're angry. We can observe love and kindness. These are the states of mind we want to get into. And the Buddha says he didn't make it up that they're good or bad. They are in their nature that way. And that's what he's trying to get us. He says we have to discover the naturalness of the virtue is natural. Non-virtue is also there. And when we interpret and see them in our mind and interpret them, we can prove that they're negative by our experience. And we can prove the positive ones are virtuous. We're not obeying a law. Do you understand? It is obeying a law. It's a natural law, but no one made it up. No one imposed it upon us. And we have to learn to experience the truth of that ourselves. And we're going to go into that in more detail. You get my point? And it's the only reason, you know, you can say, we all know it intuitively. People, you know, the Buddha's point, first of all, is that goodness is actually integral to all of us. It doesn't mean we're expressing it. I mean, look at the world. You know, some of us are really programmed in the opposite. That's very clear. So, but the goodness is fundamentally at the core of our being. When we're really advanced, which the Buddha says we can be, that means we've rid the mind of much of the rubbish. We've rid the mind of all the ego and fears and nonsense, which he says is kind of like made up rubbish. But goodness, intelligence, love, compassion are utterly integral to who we are. And he says that we can develop that to perfection. And that's truly who we are naturally, he says. And we have to learn to investigate this, to find the truth of it, not to believe it and put it on top of who we are. Do you see what I'm saying? It's very experiential.
Right. Thank you so much.
Okay, that's a really good point, Victor. So who else is there? I saw Wolfgang in San Jose. Are you in San Jose, Wolfgang? His microphone's off. Maybe he's...
Yes, in San Francisco.
Oh, there you go, in San Francisco. What are you doing there?
I live here. How are you, Mrs. Kennery?
I thought you lived in San Jose, no?
No, San Francisco.
Oh, very good. Now I know. Happy to see you, Wolfgang.
Nice to meet you.
Are you doing well? Have you been thrown out of your job or you still got a job?
Yes, everything is fine.
Okay, good. I'm very happy. You're a fortunate one. Well done. Good. Who else then? Any more questions? Steve, Christina in Sydney. There she is. You look like you're cold, Christina. You've got a scarf on. My God.
It's cold. It's cold here. It's chilly.
Is it really, darling? It's in Portland. It's getting warm. I sat in the sun today. So who else is there? Any other questions?
I have a question.
Where are we? Natalie.
Natalie.
Good, darling.
So I'm interested to understand a little bit more the relationship between intellectual certainty and what we can think of as like experiential or even somatic certainty.
Yes.
Because they strike me as not necessarily linear, but maybe more dialectical, that they work upon each other. Could you say a little more about that?
Yeah, no, but I need to know what you mean by somatic. It's not a word I use. What's that mean?
Okay. So a kind of body knowing.
Oh, okay. So, okay, I see. I know I hear that a lot. Yeah. No, I can't really give I can't really use that term exactly in Buddhism because they wouldn't use words like that. So I'll try and explain what I mean, and then you will see if we can communicate with each other, okay? So, I mean, maybe are you suggesting this is more like intuitive knowledge or instinctive knowledge, some instinctive understanding of something? Is that what you're suggesting?
That there is, yes, instinctive understanding, like we have epiphanies, but also that through our experiences, we begin to interpret without necessarily having an intellectual framework for understanding how to make these interpretations.
Oh, okay. I don't think I'm understanding you. So I'll give you the Buddhist analysis of how that is. So let's just look at I've been watching on the YouTube recently. I just watched these little 5-year-old girls playing Bach. Now, this should blow our minds, right? It's clear they haven't had much time to internalize all that knowledge, but it's really evident that knowledge is in them. And you watch them at the piano with their little fingers, and you can even feel they're interpreting the music in the most amazing adult way. So what's the explanation for that? So from the materialist point of view, there is no explanation, you know? There is none. You can't possibly, because they're still a little 6-year-old emotional child who plays with dolls, you know? Or you can see some children are geniuses at math. We can see this. We see the evidence all the time. So now, the Buddhist approach, if we take this view of karma, if we take the view of consciousness going back and back and back, if we take the view that everything we think and do and say programs our mind, then we can see that as little children, and there's a spectrum there, we can also see little children who like to harm. We don't like to think that. But, you know, I remember reading about one of the serial killer in America years ago, an interview with him. And he said, since a tiny child, his mother didn't teach him, just like this little 6-year-old wasn't taught, she just kind of poured out the music. He used to enjoy torturing creatures. So, you know, often in our world, because we think children are all born innocent and then they become naughty, you know, they've turned into, because they're made naughty by mummies or something. I'm being sarcastic here. But, you know, we don't posit anything from before much. Whereas in the same, as far as the Buddha is concerned, when we come into this life, we come in at the time of conception even programmed with many other things. We'll go into more detail, but one of the crucial ways that our past actions manifest are a bunch of habits. So we come into this life, we're a little ball of habits. I mean, my mother did not have to teach me anger. I was very good at it. You know, and we can see some children are naturally compassionate. Some children torture the creatures. Some little girls play Bach. Then especially using extreme examples. So Buddha would say, whatever the habit is, we've done that before. And in one sense, that's not complicated. I mean, if you see an adult playing piano, then you know very well they've had a chance to practice for 10 or 15 years. That's why it's surprising to say a 6-year-old. But we know it's habit. There's nothing surprising. So the more you practice something, whether it's love, killing, or music, the more instinctive it becomes, the more knowledge it is there for you to grab it and hold on to it and express it. And that 6-year-old girl couldn't teach you play the piano probably. It's just all inside her, and she's able to access that knowledge and immediately expresses it. That's the explanation in Buddhism. It's all due to past karma, whether it's murder or music. Do you see my point here? And that's what we mean. And in other words, an instinct to do something is simply the habit of having done it that often that it's second nature. And all Buddha's saying is we can make love and compassion and wisdom completely perfected, and that can be virtually our instinct. And that's what a Buddha is. You understand my point? And the body, of course, plays, and this is a very interesting point, we'll go into more detail in the weekend. You know, the downside, the negative side of our materialist view is that we don't pay any attention to what goes on in our consciousness until our body is shaking. And that's a bit, for the Buddha, that's a bit like the wheels falling off. You don't even know your car is having a problem until the wheels literally fall off. And the Buddha's approach is, because the mind is way more subtle, we need to become to observe it and in control of it and harness it well before the body is overwhelmed. In other words, we tend not to know we're angry until the words vomit out our mouth. We tend not to know we're depressed until we're inert in bed and can't move, because we're so addicted to our bodies. And I'm saying this is a negative approach. There's a good side as well. We can learn from our bodies at a very subtle level. And that's very much the tantric view too. But the negative side is we're so addicted to our being, only our body. We only notice our emotions when they're screaming. And that's why we have so much agony. We need to see our minds a lot sooner. And that's Buddha's expertise. You see what I'm saying? Naturally.
Thank you.
Good, darling. What else? So I can start to go to details now. Let's go into details about karma. I'll do that now. So, okay, the very first level of it, this law that Buddha says is a natural law. He did not make it up. It's not punishment. It's not reward, very clearly, because in Buddhism, there is no such concept as a creator, therefore no such concept as a punisher and a rewarder. And this is powerfully important to always understand, because we have this very dualistic view of good and bad, punishment, reward, guilty and shameful, and we interpret karma in that same framework, and that's really not appropriate. So it takes a while to hear it properly, you know. So, okay, the fundamental principle for the Buddha, there is trillions of consciousnesses. So let's think of our own. We're this living being, a sentient being, a senchen. And if we look into and every millisecond what we think and do and say is every second we're sowing these seeds. So we are at this moment sowing seeds that will ripen in the future. And so if we reverse it the other way, if we look into ourselves now, we are the fruit of seeds we have planted. So those fruits started to ripen at the first second of conception, when our mind found its way to our mother's fallopian tube, where it joined the egg and the sperm. Our consciousness came from before, but the seeds that were triggered from our bank vault, if you like, we've got these bank vaults of billions of seeds, because everything we think and do and say, nothing goes astray. Everything gets stored. So at the time of death, which is really crucial to understand, we're going to go into this, there's certain conditions that begin to occur when you start to stop breathing, that all these various karmic seeds from these different bank vaults start to be triggered. And so at the time of death, there's four main seeds that are triggered. And these are from our four bank vaults, if you like. Speak it simple, maybe whatever, just keeping it simple. The first one, the main one, is we'll go into the details tomorrow, a complete action of, let's say, in our case, conscious, intentional, non-killing, in general, non-harming, practiced in the context of keeping vows of non-killing in a spiritual path in the past. One of those seeds would have been triggered about soon before we stop breathing. Certain conditions occur just naturally. That seed was triggered. And that's like winning the lottery. I mean, look at the human planet. There's probably 7 billion mosquitoes under your tree in one summer, you know, in one evening. So there's clearly a lot more sentient beings than there are humans. So we won the lottery, and we created the cause ourselves from our own past virtue to go eventually to our mummy's human womb when she hops into bed with our daddy, or wherever she hopped, you know. That's the first one that's triggered already before you even stop breathing. At the same time, these 3 other sets of seeds are already triggered that sort of set us up for this next life. The next lot, and this is what we've indicated already, you know, these are the tendencies in our mind. But very simple, we look into our mind, we've got a bunch of tendencies. Piano, killing, music, love, kindness, whatever you want to call it. We've got a bunch of mental tendencies. And these tendencies are from the habit of having done them before. So this first karma that's called the fully ripened result, the type of seed that is triggered that gets you to be whether you're born a human or an ant or an animal or whatever. The second one is called your intentions similar to the cause, your habits from the past. So those seeds are triggered before you stop breathing, and they will produce your personality. So this is a crucial point. Naturally, as materialists, we think we get our anger and our love and our being good at music from our mummy and our daddy. No, you absolutely do not, Buddha says. They might share those qualities, and they can even teach us those things. We can share them and help each other grow our anger and grow our music. So my mummy was a classical musician. She was good at music because she'd done it before. She brought that tendency with her into this life. And then I was born to her, and there's reasons for that, and we'll go into that. Then she deduced that I had a tendency for music as well. So naturally we'd say, oh, mummy, my mother gave me that music. No, was good at music because I must have practiced it before. So we come together in that life, and she helps me learn music. So we help each other. But my music comes from my habit. My love, my anger, my jealousy, my kindness, my being good at piano comes from my habit. This is a massive point, actually, psychologically, because the view we have so strongly in our psychology, in our neuroscience, is that whatever is in the mind of a person, and we observe the behavior and the tendencies, we look outside for the cause. Was it what the Catholic nuns did to me? What did my mummy do to me? What about my genes? This is a very major way we analyze in modern psychology. So Buddha's not saying external conditions don't play a role. It's obvious they play a role. But his crucial point is that what is in my mind, whether I'm a psychopath or a saint, these are my tendencies coming from before. And they were triggered at this period before I even stopped dying. The third type of karma that is right, the triggered seeds that are right, triggered at the time before I stopped dying in the past life, not more than a few weeks before I found my way to my mummy's fallopian tube. These are called experiences similar to the cause. And this is, if you think of your life, we're very social beings, aren't we? From the time you're born up to now, think about it. We live life in relation to others. Mummies and daddies and aunties and uncles and sisters and rats and cockroaches. Our life is full of beings who have either harmed us or who have been kind to us. Think about it, it's extremely simple. So this is called experiences similar to the cause. And this is referring to this track of karma. That's all the experiences we have at the hands of others. This is huge. Main cause, my past actions. Main cause of my tendencies, my past actions. Main cause of my getting a human body, my past actions. And the fourth track of karma, the fourth bank vault, if you like, we can all see that we don't just float in the sky. We have physical environments. And we can all see that the physical environment plays a very big role. It impacts upon us. Some live in disgusting environments. Some live in beautiful environments. And we can see we get sick easily or get healthy easily. That's called environmental karma. And main cause of all of that, our past actions. So we really are the creator, the Buddha would say. That those four tracks of karma, those four sets of seeds, already programmed, then you die, and then eventually, and we'll go into it tomorrow, you then run like a magnet when your mummy and daddy hop into bed, you run like a magnet to that egg and sperm, and off you go, living out the past actions of your own in relation to these parents in this life. That's the essence of the summary of it, you know. So label again, all the experiences you label happy are from virtuous actions. All the experiences you would label as of suffering are from negative actions. And that's that major point that, who was it talked about asking, where was it? That was it Victor? Who said it? Asking about how, the rules. Who was that? That was Victor, right, good, a very good point. And let's just start on, we'll go on to that point now. Let's look at it a little bit. Okay, the rules. And again, this is not made up by the Buddha, Victor. It's articulated by him. He says he's observed this. In other words, you know, like if we're discussing botany here, you learn the rules of botany from people who've articulated botany, not made up botany. That's the point, isn't it, we're getting at here. So what is this natural law about the mind, about virtue and non-virtue, about good and bad, so-called, you know? And this, again, is dealt with in immense depth in the Buddhist literature. So, okay. And then here we have to kind of go into what the mind, there's two major things. We're talking about the worldview called karma, and then we have to look into the Buddhist psychological model, the way the mind works. And this is not just human, this is all beings, the mind, the Buddha would say. So in the mind, when we look into the mental consciousness, all our thoughts and feelings and emotions, all this, all our mental tendencies, all our thoughts, Buddhist psychology divides all the contents of our mental consciousness into three categories. No fourth. There are those that are negative, neurotic, disturbing, deluded, ridiculous, and have the fundamental characteristic of being misconceptions, rooted in being misconceptions. And we'll go into all this, of course. And these are the states of mind that are I-based, they're fear-based, they're completely delusional, they cause us incredible suffering, and they cause us to harm others. This is what Buddha has observed. Then you've got the qualities that are called positive, and they're called love and empathy and kindness and generosity and forgiveness. So we say anger, depression, jealousy, anxiety, we know immediately they're not the happy ones. And when we say love and compassion and kindness and intelligence, we know immediately they're the nice ones. So we can even know this. We know this. Whether you know it in yourself, check the last time you were depressed or anxious or jealous, it felt terrible. Check the last time you were loving or kind or generous, it felt good. So there's a very logical, in this sense, it's quite logical You know, we can see this, we can experience this, we can experience the truth of this. So this analysis of Buddha goes into more depth about this. So all the unhappy states of mind, the negative ones, the delusional ones, the non-virtuous ones, and don't hear it as punitive or judgmental. These are the ones that break our hearts. These are the ones, first and foremost, Buddha says, that we have to look into and recognize are causing us suffering right now, that cause us to do dumb things that then will ripen as our future suffering. So we should have compassion for ourselves, is the first point, not out of being you're a naughty person. And then when we look into the positive qualities, we can see that they're spacious and clear and connected to others. So the key characteristic of all the unhappy ones is they cause us to be cut off from others. They cause us to be separate from others, bereft and lonely and miserable and neurotic. And the stronger they are, the more miserable we are and the more harmful we are. Almost these two go together, almost, you know. And then the positive ones are more spacious. They're connected to others. They're valid. They're reasonable. They're positive. They're optimistic. They're beneficial. They're useful states of mind. They cause us ourselves right there to have happy feelings, and they cause us to help others. So they're the general way of looking at what a negative and what a positive state of mind is. So then they also would assert this third category of states of mind, and I like to call these the mechanics of the mind. And they neither have this virtuous characteristic nor the neurotic deluded characteristic. So that they call them neutral, but that's a bit misleading. So mechanics is a good term because these states of mind are called things like concentration, good memory. For example, there's two. Now, you know that, you know, everybody needs good memory. Everybody needs concentration. If you're a murderer or a meditator, you need good concentration. You need good memory, you know. So these are neither good nor bad, but they're necessary and crucial. And that's why I like to call them the mechanics of our mind. So the key thing is we need to learn to become intimately familiar. And that's what Buddhist meditation is about. Intimately familiar with this seeming chaos in here, this big emotional soup, where all of our negative ones and our positive ones are all not just mixed together like vegetables all bumping into each other in the soup, but they're like pureed soup. They're so completely caught up together. And we, in our psychological models, don't have such clarity of discrimination between these because we don't assert them in that way. It sounds almost judgmental for us in our culture to talk about negative states of mind and positive states of mind. But there's a very clear kind of way that Buddhist psychology analyzes them. And the job of being a Buddhist is actually learning to become intimately familiar with the stuff and sorting it out and learning to program our minds with the good stuff and deprogram our minds with the rubbish stuff. One, because we're sick of suffering, and two, because we don't want to harm others. That's the broad general attitude, the approach to it. We're going to go into more detail. How are we going for time? 22. So I think we can say more, but I think another few more questions before we finish. We'll go into more detail about the mind and more about breaking down karma tomorrow. Who else? Any more questions, folks?
Hi, Ani. Thank you very much for being here.
Hello,
tonight.
Steve. Yes.
This is fabulous.
Good.
I've heard said, it kind of related to what you were just talking about. I've heard said that samsara and nirvana are the same.
I understand.
Can you explain that a little?
I won't. I'll say it in principle now, Steve, but we'll certainly go into it more tomorrow. If you're going to be around tomorrow, did you plan to be? Good.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. There's very much, when we start looking into the Buddha's understanding of ultimate reality, you know, the reality of non-dualism, the reality of emptiness, all this business. And, you know, we describe, then we can start, in those terms, we can talk about how that's true. But what we're describing here is conventional reality, and that it's not contradicted. So according to conventional reality, there is negative, there is positive, there is short, there is long, there is up, there is down. There are these individual, clear, simple facts, and the clarity of getting understanding dependent arising, understanding interdependence, understanding the nuts and bolts of how things work. That's the stuff of conventional reality. And then that is the basis for us to then look deeper into conventional things and find their ultimate nature. So at that level, absolutely, good and bad, up and down, short and long, samsara and nirvana have the same essence of having no intrinsic nature. In that sense, they're the same. But we shouldn't confuse it with the relative level, the conventional level of reality. But there's no contradiction. And we'll certainly go into more detail. Is that useful for now?
Yes, thank you. That's
Fantastic.
great.
Thank you.
I'll see you tomorrow.
Good, darling. Still, Steve. Thank you so much. What else, people?
Hello.
Where are you?
Hello. Here.
The window. Okay. Zalo.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Where are you, Zalo? Where are you talking from?
I'm from Argentina.
Okay, good.
I was in the November course in Copan.
Oh, I wondered. I thought I saw you. I thought I saw
you. Yes. I was the one who sang Emptiness with the guitar.
Oh, there you go. Wonderful. That's wonderful. You did a very good job too. That was in Copan.
Yeah.
Well done.
Thank you. I really missed you because you were amazing. I mean,
good. I'm very happy.
You are amazing. I'm very happy to have another teaching with you.
Fantastic, Zalo.
I wanted to ask if you have any source for me to read or to study for more like technical ways karma works.
I understand. You know, this is so interesting. It's like we're talking about in a very casual way here, but also very detailed. It's very necessary. But usually in the Tibetan literature, it's talked about in a very simple way initially, giving sort of general guidelines in the Lam Rim literature. So if you've got like, you know, there's I mean, you know what I'm talking about when I say the Lam Rim literature. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. It's built in quite a lot of detail, but there are the original source material, you know, back in the Indian, all the great Indian literature. So all the stuff in the Lam Rim has its source in this vast body of knowledge philosophically. And so in those texts, then on the other hand, if you read those texts, they're so profoundly boring and intellectual, you go to sleep. That's the problem. That's why we need commentary on them, you know. So the details are all there in the literature. It's all mapped out. But the way it's talked is so arcane and quite sophisticated and quite hard to comprehend unless you've got some basis. Which I'm not saying you've got to study it because it needs to be studied. But it's all there in the literature. But I think starting off with the Lam Rim is a good start, you know. There's no question. Have you studied many of the Lam Rim texts at the moment? Or even just to study... I mean, I'm sure if you started studying the texts, those programs that they're doing, like in the Italian Center, you know, and so many of these programs online, like the basic program or the master's program, you go into more details about all of that stuff there. Have you interest in that kind of level of study or not?
Yes, I would. I mean, I was thinking in doing the Discovering Buddhism.
Okay, that's a good start. Well, that's a good start. It's a really good start, Zalo. And I think at the initial stages, the main point is to get the principles about karma clear and experientially have some confidence in it and have it as a basis for your actions in everyday life. That's the real one. And to learn the basic principles, the rules, as Victor put it. And that's a good start. Like, you know, when you start to play Bach, you've got to learn the basic rules and then you get more sophisticated as you keep practicing. It's the same here. And the real point about karma is, of course, to use it as a basis experientially for your behavior. It's the root, it's the basis of good ethics, you know?
Yeah, I think somehow I am on that point, like, I mean, I'm still, of course, practicing, but sometimes I get stuck because I think that, like, I would like to know better, like, technical ways in how it works. Like, sometimes doubts rise for me about things, and I don't exactly know.
Of course, that's natural. So I think, but I just think you just got to keep moving. As long as you're rooting your intellectual study in a sound practice. One of our dangers in our culture, because we're so intelligent, is we lose the plot and start getting really caught up in all the intellectual stuff and forget to see it as a basis of practice. If you don't see it as a basis of your practice and abide by the laws of morality and live in your vows, etc., then there's no benefit in
yeah, right.
And so it's in all components too. It's learning to have more confidence in the nature of mind. It's learning to have more confidence. And there's all the different pieces that you have to put together that give you some confidence as you go along. And doubts are very much exactly part of the process. And if there is logic to it, then they can solve your doubts. And that's why it is important to study. You must. Absolutely.
Yep. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Well, Catherine, that's it, isn't it?
Yeah, it's up to you.
What do you think? You can finish now or you want to go further? Or we just go? I think we've covered enough tonight, actually. And of course, because I always say, because I shout all the time and speak double the pace. So now it's probably about, anyway, I'm joking. So I think it'll do us. We can just finish a little prayer, dedication, and then we'll meet again tomorrow, some of us, and we can carry on. We can start expanding the essence of what we've talked about tonight. What we've talked about now is the nature of mind, how it's not physical, how everything we think and do and say programs us, how negative brings suffering, positive brings happiness. So we'll go into more detail about that. And then, of course, as someone asked before, we'll look into the purification practice as well. So we'll keep moving. And all of this too, and all how this leads really to the more advanced levels, you know, of understanding Buddha's view about non-duality and everything. It all leads to that, or heading in that direction, you know. Okay, people? Good enough? So we'll sing a little prayer and we finish. This is dedication. We're thinking all these seeds we planted, 90 minutes, lots of seeds, as many moments as there have been, as many seeds we planted, you know. So we think we're going to nourish these seeds from this moment forward, every second, every second. Why? So we can develop our amazing potential, so we can be happy, so we can help others. It's very clear, you know. Kewadi nyu dudai Lama Sangye Drogyurne Drowa Chikyang Malupa Jai Sala Kopasho Jang Chob Sem Chog Rinpoche Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyochig Ke Panyam Pa Me Payang Gong Ne Gong Du Pa Vasho. Thanks, everybody. Much love. See you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, Bye.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you so much.
You. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dina, did everything work okay?
I think so. How was it on your end?
Yeah, it was good.
Good. Okay. Oh, I should stop
realized
recording.
when I did the